Clara Hernandez had built a €100 million empire in just 32 years. She was the youngest CEO in Spain, feared in boardrooms and respected by her competitors. But that November night, sitting in her electric wheelchair in Madrid's most elegant restaurant, she felt like a scared little girl. It was her first blind date after the accident that 3 years earlier had changed her life forever. Alvaro Mendoza's profile promised a 40-year-old surgeon, single father of an 8-year-old girl. What Clara didn't know was that when Alvaro saw her arrive in a wheelchair, his reaction would be completely different from what she expected. And what happened in the following hours would prove that sometimes true love comes when you stop seeking perfection and start valuing authenticity. Because strength is not measured by legs that walk, but by hearts that know how to love unconditionally. Clara Hernandez checked the watch on her wrist for the umpteenth time. At 7:20 p.m. he had arrived early at the El Jardin restaurant, as he always did at the business. Better to be prepared than to be surprised. But that night it wasn't a business meeting. It was a blind date arranged by her best friend Marta, who for months had been telling her she should get back to her life. 3 years had passed since the traffic accident that changed everything. A rainy night, a curve taken too fast, a truck that failed to respect the stop sign. Clara woke up in the hospital to the news that she would never walk again. At 29, at the height of his professional success, his life had split in two. Before and after, before she had been a woman who ran in heels through the halls of her company, who jogged at dawn, who danced until the early hours. She later became the most powerful woman on 4 wheels in Spain, transforming anger and pain into a determination that led her to double the value of her company. Hernandez Tech specialized in digital solutions for accessibility, and it was no coincidence. Clara had created apps and devices that helped millions of people with disabilities live better lives. He had become their voice, their representative, living proof that limits exist only in the mind. But that night, sitting at a table in Madrid's most exclusive restaurant, Clara felt vulnerable, as she hadn't in years. She was wearing a red dress that suited her, had chosen the most elegant of his 3 wheelchairs. She had carefully applied her makeup. However, her heart was pounding with fear of rejection. In the last 3 years, he had rejected every invitation, every approach, every attempt to rebuild his love life. It was easier to focus on the work, on the numbers, on measurable successes. Love was uncharted and dangerous territory for a woman who had learned to control everything. Marta had spoken enthusiastically about Alvaro Mendoza, a 40-year-old orthopedic surgeon at La Paz Hospital, widowed for 4 years, father of Sofia, an 8-year-old girl who was raising a serious, mature man alone, who understood the value of the important things in life. But Clara hadn't told him about the wheelchair. Marta had insisted that it wasn't necessary to specify it immediately, that it was better to get to know each other as people first. Now he realized that perhaps it had been a mistake. People's reaction to his condition was always the same. First the shock, then the discomfort. Finally the polite escape. At 7:30 p.m. sharp, Clara saw a tall, elegant man enter the restaurant. Brown hair with some gray hairs at the temples. Regular features, a genuine smile while talking to the maitre d'. It had to be Alvaro. The waiter escorted him to his table, and Clara mentally prepared herself for the reaction she knew well. The man would stop, hesitate, find a polite excuse to leave. It had already happened twice in the last few months. But when Alvaro saw her, something completely unexpected happened. Alvaro Mendoza stopped in front of the table where Clara was sitting and remained silent for a moment. She kept her gaze lowered, waiting for the usual sequence. Surprise, discomfort, invented excuse, and escape. I had already mentally prepared a dignified response to allow him to leave without feeling guilty. Instead, Alvaro sat down across from her naturally and apologized for being delayed due to an emergency at the hospital. There was no trace of shock or discomfort in his eyes. He looked at her with genuine interest, as if the wheelchair were an irrelevant detail. Clara looked up in confusion. I wasn't used to this reaction. Alvaro signaled to the waiter and began talking about his work, demonstrating his familiarity with Hernandez Tech and the postoperative rehabilitation AP used in his service. He didn't pretend to be polite or try to be politically correct. He really spoke about his work with competence and respect. It was the first time that someone outside of a work context had shown interest in his company based on its technical merits, rather than out of pity or morbid curiosity. The conversation flowed naturally. Alvaro told her about his work at the hospital, the daily challenges of orthopedic surgery, and the satisfaction of helping people regain mobility. He spoke with passion, and Clara recognized in him the same dedication that she put into her activities. When the topic turned to his private life, Alvaro's face lit up as he spoke about his 8-year-old daughter, Sofia. He described her as an extraordinary girl, very mature for her age, who had to grow up quickly after losing her mother. Clara noticed the sadness that crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by paternal pride. Alvaro told him that his wife Ana had died in a car accident 4 years earlier. It had been a dark time, but Sofia had taught her that life goes on, and that we can choose to live it fully despite the pain. Those words hit Clara straight in the heart. This man knew what it meant to lose everything and rebuild. He wasn't speaking from hearsay. He had experienced the fragility of life firsthand and had chosen to move forward. During dinner, Alvaro asked him intelligent questions about his company, future projects, and the challenges of the technology sector. Not once did he make any reference to his physical condition, either with pity or curiosity. He treated her as a respectable professional, an interesting woman, a complete person. Clara found herself laughing for the first time in months. Alvaro had a subtle sense of humor that calmed her. He told her funny stories about Sofia, who had decided to operate on all her stuffed animals after visiting Dad in the hospital, turning the living room into an improvised operating room. When it was time for dessert, Clara realized that 3 hours had passed and she hadn't thought about the wheelchair even once. She had simply felt like a woman in the company of an interesting man. While drinking coffee, Alvaro confessed that Marta had told him about the wheelchair. Clara immediately tensed, asking why he had come anyway. Alvaro looked at her as if the question surprised him. Marta had told him about an intelligent, successful woman with an interesting story to tell. The wheelchair was just the way he got around. It didn't define who she was as a person. When Clara told him that most men ran away upon discovering her condition, Alvaro simply replied that they were not the right men for her. I had learned that life is too short to judge people by appearances. What matters is what we have in our hearts and minds. At that moment, Clara understood that she was about to experience something completely new. Not pity, not curiosity, not discomfort, but genuine interest in the person he had become. 2 weeks after that date, Clara found herself doing something she had never imagined. Accept Alvaro's invitation to dinner at his house to meet Sofia. The idea of meeting her daughter terrified her more than any business meeting. The children were unpredictable, direct, unfiltered. Alvaro lived in a bright apartment in the Chimberry area, clearly inhabited by a single father and a little girl. There were drawings on the refrigerator, sneakers in the entryway, school books on the kitchen table. It was a lived-in house, full of authentic life. Sofia opened the door with a radiant smile. She was a beautiful girl, with long brown hair like her father and lively eyes full of curiosity. He looked at Clara in the wheelchair for a second. He then naturally introduced himself, saying that he knew I made apps to help people and that he wanted to learn how to program. Clara was speechless by the spontaneity of that girl. There was no discomfort, fear, or pity in his gaze, only genuine curiosity and interest. During dinner, Sofia bombarded her with questions about technology, computers, and video games. She wanted to know how the apps were made, if it was difficult, if she could learn too. Clara found herself explaining complex concepts to her in simple terms and realized that Sofia absorbed everything like a sponge. When Sofia asked how the wheelchair worked, Clara explained that it was controlled by a computer, maneuverable with a joystick, and that she was developing a version that could be controlled with the eyes. Sofia was excited and asked for a ride. Against Alvaro's polite protests, Clara agreed. Sofia climbed onto Clara's knees, who showed her how the joystick worked. Together they walked around the living room with Sofia laughing excitedly and Alvaro looking at them tenderly. At that moment, Clara had a vision of the future that scared and excited her. He saw himself in that house as part of that family with Sophia, considering her not a person worthy of pity, but a friend, a reference figure, perhaps even a second mother. After dinner, while Sophia watched cartoons, Alvaro explained to Clara that his daughter had a special gift. He saw people for who they really were, not what they looked like. After Anna's death, many adults didn't know how to behave with Sophia. They treated her like she was fragile. Sophia hated that feeling. Maybe that's why it was so natural with Clara. I recognized a strong person. Clara confessed that she had never felt so normal with a child. They generally looked at her like an alien. Alvaro explained that he had always taught Sophia that the world is full of different people and that diversity is a source of wealth. Everyone has something special to offer. As she was preparing to leave, Sophia ran up to Clara with a drawing. It was a colorful depiction of three figures: a woman in a red wheelchair, a tall man, and a little girl holding hands in front of a house. He had made it for her, he explained shyly. There were three of them, and I hoped he would come back soon. Clara looked at that drawing and felt her heart swell with emotion. Within hours, that little girl had fully accepted her, seen her as a potential part of her family, and drawn her into her future. Returning home that night, Clara understood that something irreversible was happening. She wasn't just falling in love with Alvaro. She was falling in love with the idea of family that he and Sophia represented. Sophia's drawing hung on her desk next to the diplomas and awards she had received. Every time she looked at it, Clara smiled, thinking that perhaps she had finally found something more valuable than any business success. In the months that followed, Clara's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. For the first time since the accident, she started leaving the office at 6 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. She had something more important waiting for her: dinners with Alvaro and Sophia, the weekends spent together. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. The everyday moments that had always scared her. Sophia had become her little shadow. Every time Clara visited them, the little girl would run to meet her to tell her the news from school, show her her homework, and ask for advice on the technology projects she had started with the computer Clara had given her. One Saturday afternoon, while they were in the park, Sophia approached the wheelchair and asked with genuine curiosity if he was sad about not being able to walk. Alvaro tensed, but Clara signaled him to let the girl speak. Clara answered honestly. Sometimes yes, especially at the beginning, it had been very difficult. I missed running, dancing, climbing stairs without thinking, but I had discovered that there are many ways to be strong. I could no longer run with my legs, but I could run with my mind. I couldn't dance anymore, but I could create beautiful things that helped other people. And above all, I had learned that what matters are the people you love. Sophia nodded seriously, then suddenly lit up. He was like a superhero. Superheroes are different, and that is precisely why they have special powers. Clara burst out laughing. In one sentence, that little girl had summed up what had taken her years to understand. That same Saturday night, after putting Sophia to bed, Alvaro and Clara sat on the couch. There was a tension in the air that they both felt, but no one dared to address. Alvaro took her hand and confessed that these months had been the most beautiful of his life after a long time. She had brought a light that was missing in that house. Clara felt her heart race. It had been extraordinary for her too. Sophia was wonderful, and he had made her feel like a woman again rather than a person with a disability. Alvaro continued in a serious voice. He had fallen in love with her strength, her intelligence, the way she laughed, the way she looked at Sophia as if she were already his daughter. Clara felt tears pricking her eyes. She loved them both too. But I was afraid of not being enough, of being a burden, of limiting them. Sophia deserved a mother figure who could run with her, carry her, do all the normal things. Alvaro interrupted her by taking her face in his hands. Clara already did all that. Sophia adored her. She looked for her when she was sad. She told her her secrets. She considered her the greatest person in the world. I didn't need a mom who ran around. She needed a mother who loved her, who understood her, who inspired her, and Clara did all of that every day. At that moment, a small voice came from the bedroom door. Sophia appeared in her pajamas with her hair disheveled and the teddy bear under her arm. Without waiting for permission, he climbed between the two, snuggling up against Clara. Alvaro said softly that he should go to sleep, but Sofia had heard their conversation. Clara had said she was afraid of not being a good mother to her. Sofia looked at her seriously. He had prayed to the 3 wise men to send him a new mother. It didn't matter what she was like. The important thing was that she was good and that I loved her. When she met Clara, she understood that the kings had listened to her. Tears began to fall down Clara's face. Sofia continued with adult wisdom. Clara was already his mother in his heart. Mothers aren't just the ones who give birth to you. Moms are the ones who love you, who help you grow, who are there for you when you're scared. And Clara did all that. Alvaro hugged them both. And at that moment Clara understood that she had found her family. Not the one she had dreamed of as a child, but the perfect one for the woman she had become. That night, for the first time since the accident, Clara fell asleep without thinking about what she had lost, but about everything she had gained. A year after that hug on the couch, life had taken a turn Clara would never have dared to dream of. Alvaro had proposed to her during a family dinner with Sofia, taking out the ring hidden in her backpack and exclaiming that they were finally asking her. The wedding was held at a beautiful, accessible estate on the outskirts of Madrid. Sofia acted as bridesmaid, proud of her pink dress and the important task of carrying the rings. During the ceremony, he watched Clara and Alvaro exchange vows with eyes full of happiness. At the moment of saying yes, Sofia clapped so loudly that all the guests burst into laughter. But the real change was in the everyday life built day by day. Clara had moved her main office closer to home, so she could accompany Sofia to school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. I had discovered the pleasure of helping her with her homework, listening to her stories, and being present at important moments. Sofia, for her part, had become her little ambassador. At school, he proudly told stories about his mother, Clara, who created fantastic apps and traveled in a super technological wheelchair. He had transformed diversity into something cool, and his classmates were fascinated by the stories he told. One afternoon, while Sofia was at a birthday party, Alvaro and Clara talked seriously about adoption. Sofia had asked if she could have a little brother or sister, and they had begun to consider the idea. Clara confessed that Sofia deserved to have siblings, and that she had always dreamed of having a large family. Although she could not carry a natural pregnancy, there were many children who needed love. Alvaro asked her if she was sure. It was an important step. Clara replied that she was absolutely sure. Sofia had taught him that love is not born from blood, but from the choice to love each other every day. They could give that opportunity to other children. The adoption process began, a long but exciting journey. During interviews with social workers, Clara discovered that her condition was not seen as an obstacle, but as a resource. She had proven herself a present and loving mother, and her experience made her particularly well suited to fostering children with special needs. Months later, the call they were waiting for came. There were 2 little siblings, Pablo, 6 years old, and Lucia, 4, who needed a family. Pablo had a mild cognitive disability and many families had written him off. For Clara and Alvaro, it was love at first sight. The first meeting was exciting. Sofia had prepared welcoming drawings and explained to her future siblings that her mother had a special wheelchair, but that she was the strongest mother in the world. Pablo looked at her curiously and asked her to show him how it worked. Lucia, more shy, hid behind Pablo, but looked at Clara with interest. Insertion was not always easy. Pablo had had difficult experiences and was distrustful. Lucia had nightmares and constantly sought peace, but Clara and Alvaro faced every difficulty with patience and love, supported by Sofia, who cared for her new siblings with dedication. The turning point came 3 months later, when Pablo fell off his bike and hurt his knee. While Alvaro was treating him, the boy burst into tears and for the first time called Clara Mama, asking her to stay close. That word, spoken with confidence and necessity, was more valuable than any professional success. One night, as the children were being put to bed, Sofia commented that hers was truly a special family. They had a doctor dad, a super techie mom. She was the responsible older sister. Pablo was super sweet, and Lucia, who was the most affectionate person in the world. Clara looked at that scene. Alvaro reading the bedtime story, Sofia helping Lucia, Pablo falling asleep peacefully, and realized she had found the most authentic happiness. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was infinitely better than the one I had dreamed of. 5 years after that first date at the restaurant, Clara found herself giving a speech she never would have imagined. She had been invited as a keynote speaker at the International Conference on Inclusion, but this time she wasn't just speaking as a yes or a successful speaker. She was speaking as a wife, mother, and woman who had transformed a tragedy into a love story. On stage, in front of hundreds of people, Clara told her story without holding anything back. The accident, the fear, the loneliness, and then the meeting with Alvaro and Sofia that changed everything. In the front row sat her husband and their 3 children, Sofia, now 13 years old and already passionate about programming. Pablo, 11 years old, became the most protective of the family, and Lucia, 9 years old, who dreamed of being a doctor like her father. Concluding her speech, Clara explained that true love sees no barriers, no limitations, and no differences. True love sees the whole person and chooses to love them every day with everything they are and everything they bring with them. The audience stood up for a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, but Clara only looked at her family, who were applauding her proudly. Sofia blew him a kiss. Pablo gave him a thumbs up. Lucia waved a drawn sign at school that read, "My mom is the strongest in the world." After the conference, on the way home, Sofia made a comment that shocked everyone. According to her, Clara would never have met her father if it hadn't been for the accident. Perhaps it had been fate that wanted them to meet. Clara reflected on those words. It was true that pain had made her deeper, more empathetic, more capable of appreciating the authentic things in life. Perhaps, without that experience, I would never have slowed down enough to notice a man like Alvaro, who sought substance more than appearance. That night, while the children were doing homework and Alvaro was preparing dinner, Clara sat in her garden to watch the sunset. The wheelchair no longer seemed like a prison to him, but simply the means that allowed him to move through the world. It was part of her, like her green eyes or her smile. Alvaro brought her 2 cups of tea and sat down next to her. Clara confessed that she was thinking about being grateful. Grateful for the accident that had brought her there. Grateful for the fear that had taught her courage. Grateful for the solitude that had taught her the value of love. Alvaro also expressed his gratitude for having met a woman who had taught him that strength lies not in the absence of vulnerability, but in the ability to be vulnerable and move forward anyway. At that moment, the 3 children arrived and jumped on them for a group hug. Sofia had finished her homework and wanted to show Clara the code she had written for an app to help children with cognitive disabilities like Pablo. Pablo had drawn the family as superheroes, each with their own special power. Lucia had learned to say "I love you" in sign language to also communicate with the deaf children in her class. That night, as the children were being put to bed, Clara stood in front of the bathroom mirror. He saw a 37-year-old woman with a few wrinkles, but eyes that shone with genuine happiness. He saw a beloved wife, a proud mother, an accomplished professional, a complete person. The wheelchair reflected in the mirror was no longer a symbol of what he had lost, but of everything he had gained. It was the means that had led her to love, to family, to a better version of herself. Alvaro caught up with her and hugged her from behind. When he asked her what she saw, Clara smilingly replied that she saw home. She saw the life that was destined for her, even though she hadn't recognized it when she had first dreamed it. That night, as she fell asleep next to the man who had loved her unconditionally, in a house filled with the laughter of her children, Clara reflected that sometimes the most beautiful stories are born from the most difficult moments, and that true love does not seek perfection, but rather embraces authenticity. Because in the end, strength is not measured by legs that walk, but by hearts that know how to love without limits. Like it, if you believe that true love knows no boundaries, please comment on which moment in the story moved you the most. Share to inspire those who believe that differences are limits. Subscribe for more stories of true love and special families. Sometimes what we think is our weakness becomes our greatest strength. Sometimes love comes when we stop hiding and start showing ourselves as we are. And sometimes the most beautiful families are born from the union of hearts that know how to see beyond appearances, because true beauty is not in perfection, but in the authenticity of the heart. See?